Placework. I'm the principal in charge of our work on the City of Hollister General Plan. And I have a slideshow that includes our agenda and some introductions. So the first thing I'm going to do is just switch over to showing you that slideshow, which you should be able, no, hang on, I've done that wrong again. There we go. And now you should be able to see my screen, and it should be an image that says the Draft General Plan, Climate Action Plan, and Agricultural Preservation Program. Can everybody see that? Yes, great. Okay. So tonight's meeting is going to be an overview of 3 different major components of the general plan project that Placeworks has been working on with the City of Hollister. And these are the general plan itself, the Climate Action Plan, and the Agricultural Preservation Program. And we have a presentation about each of those items, and then we'll take your questions and answers, briefly any comments you may have. And that is scheduled to end around 8 o'clock, perhaps a little earlier, but we are also able to stay until 8:30 to take any additional comments that you may have after the presentation. So if during the time of the presentations and questions and answers, if you don't get a chance to make individual comments, do know that towards the end of the meeting, we will have time for that as well. I want to start first, though, by introducing key people who are here. I'm not sure he's been able to join us yet, but Dave Mirioni is the interim city manager and is tracking this project very closely. And here with us this evening also from the City of Hollister, we have Christy Hopper, who is the relatively new Development Services Director. I'm sure some of you have already met her. And then we have Eva Kelly and Amber Cameron, who are senior staff planners working in the city and who have been on this project since the very beginning and are really the backbone of making this project work. From the Placework side, we are a consultant firm that is working with the city to produce the general plan and the related documents. We have with us here this evening not only myself, but also Carrie Stone, who is our project manager, Eli Crispy, who has been working on the Climate Action Plan and will be presenting it this evening, and Jenny Yu, who's on the Zoom as Zoom question Ask Me. And if you have any questions about Zoom, you can ask her. If you have project questions, you can send those in the chat to Carrie, whose name is in the Zoom link as project questions. We are going to be taking questions in writing, but we'll also be taking questions just verbally, orally, if people want to raise their hands to ask. And these are instructions about those chat functions. If you do have questions, you can submit them at any time by pressing on the little button down at the bottom of your screen. I hope you can see that on this screen, that it shows how there's a box that says chat. If you push that chat button, you should be a question either about content to the project questions, or if you're having any difficulties, you can send a message to Jenny at Zoom questions. And as it says here on the slide, and as I already said, you can also raise your hand to be recognized. So I'm going to just dive in and talk about the general plan itself. That's the first of our 3 presentations. And then we'll stop at the end of that to take any questions that have come up in the chat or that you might have about the project. Many of you, I think, do know that the general plan is the state-mandated blueprint for growth and development that every city and every county has within the state of California. And it's the document that establishes the community's vision and supporting goals, policies, and actions regarding growth, development, and conservation. And it's intended to provide a consistent direction for future development, to balance growth, conservation, and quality of life, and also to document baseline environmental conditions, so as conditions change over time, that can be tracked. The general plan has a series of elements in it, and elements are essentially chapters. The reason they're called elements is that they're not required to be in any particular order as chapters. In Hollister, the existing general plan and our updated general plan has a total of 6 elements that already exist and are being updated. You see them on the left-hand slide here. One is called land use and community design, circulation, housing, natural resources and conservation, open space and agriculture, and health and safety, which includes not only the state mandated safety element, but also the noise element. I should mention that the housing element is a separate document that is currently in preparation as well, but will be adopted separately later in the future. Our general plan that we're creating here also has one customized element that's been in the general plan since 2005, and which we've updated, which is called community services and facilities. And there are two new elements being added as part of this update, which are arts and economic development. Actually, and we also have environmental justice, which is not on this slide, but which is a third one that's being added as well. And as this slide says, the general plan was most recently updated in 2005. So it's high time for an update, given that it's been almost 20 years since that's happened. So the general plan does have a series of goals for the update. As the city embarked on this process, the city council articulated 7 goals that should be accomplished through the update of this general plan. Firstly, to engage a broad spectrum of the community, and we've been doing that throughout this process. We've had numerous meetings, we've had an ongoing website, we've conducted surveys, we've had pop-ups. We'll talk a little bit about some of that, but it's important that you know that that has all been happening over these last 3 years. We've been asked to establish a community vision for Hollister through the year 2040, and I'll be showing you that vision tonight. That's already been reviewed multiple times by the community, by General Plan Advisory Committee, by the Planning Commission and the City Council, and it's included in the general plan. And part of the other goals are to maintain the small town agricultural character that typifies Hollister, to manage growth consistent with overall community and goals, to ensure high quality development and to support economic development, and to respond to state mandates and the state's general plan guidelines. The project consists of actually a large number of components, which you see listed here, and the general plan update is really only one of them, although it's certainly the centerpiece of the project. The project has already also included implementation of Senate Bill 743, which changes the way that traffic impacts are assessed in California. That work is largely complete. We have also created a climate action plan, which you'll be hearing about tonight. We have prepared a hazard mitigation plan in coordination with San Benito County. We've published a full environmental impact report, which was actually published just yesterday and which is now available for review. We have the agricultural preservation program, which we'll be talking about tonight. We have inclusionary housing ordinance that's under separate review by the City Council at this time, and we will be conducting a municipal service review. So there's been a lot of related components, all related to overall planning within the city of Hollister. This general plan is required by law to have a planning area, and that area by definition is at least as large and can be larger than the city's limits and sphere of influence. And this map shows you all of those areas. The narrowest of these areas is the city limit, which is shown in the dark blue-black line on this map. It's a little bit hard to see, but it runs through here where I'm pointing with my cursor. There are larger areas, which are the city's existing sphere of influence with some changes to that sphere proposed. The city's urban service area, which is even a little larger and is a place where the city is willing to provide services, possibly into the future. And then a planning area, which you can see here is even larger and extends all around the city on all sides and includes some of the agricultural lands around the city as well. We have had, as I mentioned already, a lot of public involvement in this process, which has included 9 workshops and events before tonight, 2 other online activities, a total of 8 meetings of the General Plan Advisory Committee, 4 meetings before the Planning Commission, and 6 meetings before the City Council. So, of course, all of those are public meetings, and there will be an ongoing set of Planning Commission meetings and City Council meetings as we move forward to wrap up this project and get the general plan adopted. We also, as part of our community outreach efforts, have had a general plan website, hollister2040.org. As you can see from this splash screen, as it's called, this is an image of the website. It has background information. It has information about public engagement. It has background documents. It has a way to sign up for the mailing list and contact city staff about the project. So it's had a lot of information and continues to exist as a repository of information about this project. And this slide shows you some of the tasks that we've already done that have included establishing the baseline conditions, creating the community-wide vision that I'll be showing you in a few minutes. We went through a whole host of policy issues and options and got first the GPAC, then the Planning Commission, and then the City Council to give us direction about those policy options. Based on their policy direction, we prepared the draft general plan really to completely implement what the council had already asked us to do. And we're now finalizing that general plan in response to any final council direction that may come up. But I do really want to underscore here that all of the things you see before you this evening were items that the City Council and the Planning Commission and the GPAC all gave us input about already, and they do reflect direction from the GPAC, the Planning Commission, and the City Council. So this, lots of words on this screen, this is the entire vision for the general plan, and it's verbatim lifted from the general plan document that some of you have probably reviewed. And I am going to kind of read it quickly right now, just so you get a sense of all the ideas in it. It'll be the only time I spend this amount of time this evening going over any individual text. But I do want just to point out that this vision talks about understanding that Hollister is at the heart of San Benito County and a welcoming place where people can live, work, and play. That people make a choice to live here because of the strong sense of community, the diversity, and the wide range of housing types for all income levels. It's framed by both the Diablo and Gabilan ranges and surrounding agricultural lands. It preserves its historic pasts and ensures that new development complements the small town charm. High quality design and strong architectural character are part of what attract people to the retail areas and contribute to a sense of place. The vision goes on to say that Hollister wants to be known as an innovation hub to attract businesses to the downtown, the industrial parks, and the airport, so that these areas can collaborate with each other and benefit from the diverse labor pool. The vision goes on to talk about tourism and adding tourists to Hollister's economic diversity with dining, shopping, and staying in Hollister while people are en route to Pinnacles National Park, the State Vehicle Recreation Area, and surrounding wineries. There's an availability of high quality jobs so that residents can work locally. This is certainly something that the city wants to be working on more now to make sure that people can free up time that might otherwise be spent in commuting. Vision goes on to say that we want to look at traveling by bus, car, bicycle, and on foot, make them all easier within the city so that neighborhood schools, shops, jobs, healthcare, and public services are connected by bikeways, walkways, and bus and rail lines. Community life is to flourish here in the city with a vibrant historic downtown, a lively art scene, inviting public parks and public spaces, and activities and services for people of all ages. And then there's a statement that new growth should be focused primarily in existing urban areas or adjacent to existing development to enhance connectedness and preserve the active agricultural uses as well as open space areas. And that the city will coordinate with the County of San Benito and other local agencies to ensure that growth is well planned, sustainable, and provided with needed services and resources. Now, all of this vision, of course, is implemented through a whole series of goals, policies, and actions, and you find those in the general plan, and I'll be talking about them this evening, but this is really the statement that's intended to sum up what this general plan is about. In addition to that, the general plan has 4 values within it that are really right there with the vision that I just went over. And these are equity, diversity, innovation, and sustainability, ensuring that Hollister is a place that serves everyone's needs and treats all people fairly, that it has respect for diverse social, cultural, religious, and political backgrounds, that innovation is at the forefront with people thinking boldly and fostering new ideas, and lastly, with policies intended to contribute to social, economic, and environmental sustainability. So from here, I'm going to go through those elements that I already mentioned and give you a very quick overview of them. And you'll see that this slide and the next ones are pretty text intensive, but I'm not going to read everything. The point of showing you all this text is just to give you a sense of the breadth of the document. And if you do have specific questions about items, you can feel free to ask in the chat or raise your hand to ask or submit questions in other ways. So to start with, we have the land use and community design element, and this is the element that establishes the type, location, density, and intensity of development, and it provides guidance on community design. And you can see here that there are 9 goals on this slide, as well as 10 more here, a total of 19 goals that are intended to be able to implement that overall vision of cohesive and high quality land use and design. Next slide we have is the land use map. This is a map that's required to be in a general plan and that shows allowed land uses within the city. And I want to let you know that most of this map is precisely the same as the map that existed in the past. So if you look at this map, you can see where the designations have changed. All the white areas are unchanged, which is obviously most of the incorporated city. And the places that there have been some changes have been the green around the edges of the city, and that is actually an area in the planning area that was not designated in the general plan in the past. And then some pockets of new designations that you can see on some of the undeveloped parcels in town and at some of the surrounding edges of town. And again, we can talk about these if you have specific questions, but the big takeaway here is that much of the city is unchanged with limited changes on key parcels and at the periphery of the town. There have also been a few changes to the densities allowed within the general plan, generally to either clarify those or in some cases to make them marginally higher than they were. So you see here changes to residential estate, low density residential, medium density, high density residential, and mixed use, all being changed somewhat to allow for greater development flexibility and greater development intensity in keeping with that goal articulated by the City Council to try and focus development inside of the developed incorporated areas of the city at this time. So that gives you an overview of the land use and community design element. I'll shift now to the circulation element, which is the chapter that addresses location and design of streets and roadways, vehicle circulation, parking, pedestrian and bicycle access, transit, and transportation of goods. And you can see here 5 goals on this slide, which are the major goals within that circulation element. And again, all with policies and actions to support them, as well as a map of major circulation facilities that you see on this slide, and which is within the general plan as well. And again, one that we can answer any questions about if you have questions about this map. The community services and facilities element focuses on providing high quality infrastructure and public services throughout the city. You can see 8 goals here supporting individual types of services, again with a set of policies and actions to support them. We have an economic development element, which is a brand new element and is intended to provide guidance to support and maintain an economically viable community. And in particular, gives a lot of guidance about ways to attract new retail businesses, new downtown development, adding more jobs, bringing in tourists, creating a better industrial base, redeveloping the airport area. These are all some of the themes within the economic development element. Then we have the natural resources and conservation element, one that has existed before and which we've made minor changes to, a total of 7 goals that are intended to preserve natural lands and resources, to improve air quality, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have a health and safety element, which has focused on improving community safety and mitigating natural and human-caused hazards, and it integrates the local hazard mitigation plan. It includes these 8 goals that work to preserve community health, that are to create a more resilient community, to protect the community from seismic and geologic hazards, and from flood hazards, and to overall maintain safety, and also to make sure that noise levels are not unacceptably high, and that's also required under state law. We have an open space and agriculture element. This is, again, an existing element from the existing general plan, and that has two goals: to preserve and protect open space and the natural environment, and to preserve viable agricultural activities and lands. And this is the place where we see the policy support for the agricultural preservation ordinance that we'll be talking about this evening as well. We have a brand new arts and culture element, which focuses on fostering and supporting arts and cultural programming throughout the city. And it has a total of 8 goals: to maintain, establish, and maintain strong civic arts leadership, and to recognize diverse creative voices, and to enable all Hollister residents to have access to the arts, both as participants and as consumers of art. And then finally, we have a new environmental justice element, which sets policy and direction to minimize the effects of environmental hazards and any planning issues that come up with regard to disadvantaged communities, and to improve access to food, healthcare, and physical activity, particularly for disadvantaged populations that may not otherwise have such good access to those amenities. And you see a total of 10 goals here, again, with supporting policies and actions that are in support of that overall vision for the environmental justice element. So that's an end to my first presentation. Hopefully I didn't go by too quickly, but at the same time gave you an overview of the document. At the end of each of these 3 presentations, and this is the first of the 3, we're going to open it up for any questions you have. If you've put questions in the chat, I'll be asking Carrie to read those. Or if you don't have questions, if you haven't posted them in the chat, you can raise your hand. And when I say raise your hand, that means either wave at me on your screen, or else lift your virtual hand using the chat bar at the bottom, and I'll see that you've raised your hand with a question, and I'll be able to call on you. Carrie, do we have any questions that have been put in the chat?
Yes, we have 3. The first one is, why are single-family detached homes proposed to be prohibited in medium-density residential?
I don't think it's accurate to say that single-family homes are prohibited, but the densities are high enough that, generally speaking, the densities might suggest a 0 lot line or duplex or townhouse type. And the reason for that is because of the guidance that we did receive from the GPAC, the Planning Commission, and the City Council, that today Hollister has a very large number of single-family homes. It's about 80% single family and 20% multifamily. And the GPAC, the Planning Commission, and the City Council all felt that it was time for that to shift somewhat, and so that new development should mostly feature some other housing types, understanding that single family homes are already widely available, and the city leadership was looking for other housing types to be constructed as well.
David, a small point of clarification, the land use designation does state that single family homes are prohibited.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. Sorry, I forgot.
All right, the second question is, what is the rationale behind zoning land agriculture along the Union Road corridor between existing residential development?
The city did spend quite a bit of time in that Union Road area looking at the designations that exist today, and the development that exists today. There are some areas where some residential development has already occurred, particularly under county auspices, which the city did not necessarily feel that it wanted to continue in that pattern. And so there was quite careful study done to determine which parcels should have development designations and which ones should have agricultural designations. And I think it is true that there are a couple sites, they're relatively large sites, but where there would be residential development on 1 or 2 sides, but where agricultural uses would be preserved near them. Carrie, do you want to add anything on that for us?
No, I think that's right.
Okay, thank you. And I see Peter Lynn's hand is up, but let's take one other question. You said there were 3, Carrie. We'll take that 3rd one, and then we'll go to Peter, who's raised his hand.
How does the general plan propose to address property owners who are stuck between jurisdictions? Properties that are in the county but cannot develop to county standards because of city sphere or urban service area issues.
Well, it's an interesting way of couching the question. Every jurisdiction, whether it's the city or the county, has the authority to regulate land use within its boundaries. And so there are parcels that are near the edge of the city, which they might be outside the city and an owner wishes that they might be annexed. There may be a parcel that's already in the city and an owner wishes that they had not been annexed, wishes that they were still in the county. But whichever jurisdiction you're in is the one that does regulate your use. It is the case that the city has historically provided infrastructure services to some areas of the county, and has recently, through this general plan process, has learned from LAFCO that in some cases that might have been done in non-compliance with some understandings of state law as to how services are provided. So one of the things that the general plan seeks to address is to make sure that the regulations regarding the extension of services into non-city areas really does follow state law. But with that said, it would still be up to individual property owners to bring proposals to either the county or the city. If you're in the city, you would bring that proposal to the city. If you're in the county, you would generally bring it to the county unless you wanted to ask to be annexed. And in each case, you would need to follow the regulations of either the city or the county. So I wouldn't exactly say that people are stuck in the middle, but I would say it is true, of course, that people have to follow the regulations of whichever of the two jurisdictions in which they're proposing a project and in which they happen to be located. So Carrie, I don't know, that's probably all the questions you've got, but if you get any more, I'll come back to you. And for now, we'll take questions from from Peter, then from Christina and Carson, who all have their hands up. So Peter, you're next.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening, David. Thank you so much for taking my question. My name is Peter Lin. I'm a development manager with Republic Urban Properties. We are working on several housing sites across the city of Hollister. But we have some serious concerns about the proposed increase in density across several of the sites, particularly our site along San Felipe corridor and Maple Street. The issue is that the increase in density really makes us unable to build and propose the projects that we've been proposing, which are higher density townhome housing developments that the city does not have as many of. And these are type of products where we know how to build them and we know how to finance them. So just the question is, has the city done any study or analysis on whether or not this increase in density range with the products that come in this density range are actually viable for developers to build? And if not, we are more than happy to share our analysis on the different housing types that we have looked into, and really help this analysis. We want to be supportive of the city's housing goals, and obviously increasing housing supply is a critical goal. But we just want to make sure that as the general plan is being developed, that the city is considering what is viable in today's economic condition. And that is something that we're very much in tune with. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for that. I think that's mostly a comment. We have received a letter from I don't know if it was signed by you, Peter, but someone did email us with a similar comment, and we will be sure to send that comment along to the city council. I can assure you that PlaceWorks is working throughout California in a variety of communities, many of them very similar to Hollister, and there are many communities that are building projects that are within the density ranges that are proposed within the general plan. So I know, I don't want to get into the details of individual projects. I do know that the projects you all are looking at, for instance, at San Felipe and Santa Ana, are roughly in the 18 to 20 units per acre range. I know the city is looking in the downtown to see higher densities that would more approximate what's typical in an urban area, as opposed to a drive-up townhouse project, which is the kind of project that you all are preliminary looking at. And it will be a policy question for ultimately the city council to determine whether they want to stick with that vision that they've already articulated, which is to look for some higher density types and a little more urban types within the downtown, or if comments like yours would move the council to look for more of a drive-up townhouse development within the downtown. That would be a policy decision to be made by the city council. Christina is next.
Thank you, David. I'd like to prefer to have Carson go first because I have 10 points I'd like to discuss.
And you have 10 questions.
Correct.
Okay, wow, you're very thorough. Sure, Carson, we'll take you first.
Thank you. I only have 9 points, so that
Okay.
should be good.
All right.
My first, so I just make note that all the questions that were answered or asked via Carrie came from me. So just as a note, the third question I think is to me the most important the item, and that has to do with the, like I said, people being stuck between jurisdictions. And I understand your answer, but you do have people who've applied for projects in the county or in the urban service area who were not allowed to proceed with their project as would have been fine with the county because the city stepped in and said, no, we'd like to see sewer service there. The city had no plans to annex that area into the city anytime soon. So that property owner was unable to move forward with their project and it still sits vacant. That is, to me, a problem. I don't see a mechanism in the draft plan that solves that. So I know there's some notes about removing the urban service area or expanding the sphere of influence of the city limit, but you have a major problem with out of jurisdiction sewer service right now, whether it's Anderson Homes getting hookups that would probably be illegal under the new plan. So I just want to know what's the long range plan to solve these issues around the sewer service that is there. The capacity's there. It's all fine. We're taking in San Juan Bautista, and I think we're looking at 8 or 10 times the capacity to give them that they actually need. So it's a long question, but how do you solve that?
Well, I think that, I mean, I don't know if Christy or others will want to add anything, but I would say again that this is a policy issue as opposed to a technical question. The direction we did get from, and I know I'm repeating this, but from the GPAC, then the Planning Commission, then the City Council, was first that they did ask to get a more thorough understanding of what state law is on this issue. We did let them know that we believe that some of the allocations of sewer service made in the past were not actually consistent with state law. And we were asked to help write policies and procedures that would be consistent with state law. And so we have done that. If the city, under state law, the way that the city can extend services to wider areas would be to designate the land as part of the sphere of influence and then make a plan to annex it, and either to go ahead and do the annexation or at least be able to say to the LAFCO that annexation is expected soon. And then under those circumstances, public services, including sewer, can be extended. The direction that we've gotten to date has been that that's not something that the city council wanted to do. They wanted actually to see the sphere of influence even contracted a little from what it has been. And that's what this general plan shows. And again, that was a policy decision made by the city council. So to the extent that there's a question there, I think those are the answers. I certainly understand, Carson, you may feel that that's not the right policy direction, and I would encourage you to write a letter so that you're on the record of having said that. If you feel that the sphere, for instance, should be expanded to be larger, then you should let the city council know that. It is the law that, generally speaking, and there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, the city is not legally allowed to extend services outside of its sphere. So if the city does want to extend services to areas, particularly sewer and water, to areas that are outside current urbanization areas, the first step would be to get them into the sphere and start moving towards not only having them in the sphere, but actually to move towards annexing them. And again, those are policy questions that would have to be addressed or readdressed at the city council level. The city council has already given direction on that. That's what's in the general plan today. And if there's a desire by the city council to see that changed, it would probably be in response to comments from folks like yourself.
Thank you very much. I just think it'll be good that the general plan update eventually matches the reality of what's happening in the county. Thank you.
All right. So Christina, I think we'll take a couple questions from you. I'm not sure we'll have time for 10 questions, but we can at least take a few.
No problem, David. I appreciate the opportunity. One is I will collaborate with Carson. I'd like to echo his consideration and concern in regard to it's really a regional sewer treatment plant, and that's how it was built and how it was intended, and our community college should be connected to it. It's very important for economic development, social justice, and environmental in every way. So any way we can bring that discussion either outside of this or within this plan would be great.
Great. Can I stop you there for just a minute?
Sure.
Because I do want to make sure we get to hear from everyone, and I particularly want to answer questions. So can you look down your list? If you have any actual questions to help understand the document, could you prioritize those? And then if you have comments, we'll take those also. And Christy wants to add something there.
And
Right. So, and I'm not sure how many people wanted to discuss the out of jurisdiction utility connections, but this is a discussion that the city and the city council will be having probably in the coming months. So as part of kind of the general plan is general, if you will, and it does create some policies and some goals. But this individual study or this conversation that we on out of jurisdiction service will be a much bigger discussion at a later time. So please stay in touch with the city and with agendas, and we'll do as much outreach as possible when that happens, just to kind of keep this moving.
great. Thank you, Christy. I appreciate you. One is just a point of information. The city did commission a retail leakage study, and this is in regard to ED 0.1, the economic development element it's not too recent, but a leakage report for retail done by Buxton. I'm hoping it was just consideration to Khaled.
And well, if I could, I mean, again, I'm not sure
Yeah.
what the question was, but I do want to make sure you know that we also did some leakage analysis by our team, by BAE Economics, and that's on the project website.
Fantastic. The other is in regard to data again. I just want to make sure, David, that your team is aware. We worked with Khaled, the San Benito EDC, to do a local economic assessment program. There were findings and recommendations that were made relatively recently. I just want to make sure that if your team haven't been privy to it or didn't consider it, it's important and poignant. We spoke to 30 or more different community members and developing our economic development strategies for 2017. We interviewed more than 100 different community members and stakeholders within our region. We just want to make sure that you know that there's access to that data. It could be supportive.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And if there are, we believe that our economic development element is quite comprehensive, but if there are concepts, strategies that you want to see in that element that aren't there yet, please do review it and give us some ideas, and we'll certainly forward those to the Planning Commission and Council and ask them to consider adding additional ideas.
That'd be great. Your information is great. A lot of it isn't really specific to our region, so I'd love to support you. I serve as a contractor and executive director to our San Benito County Business Council, and I was the project manager for the Economic Development Strategy 2017 to 2022 for the county. And I'm here to help. The county the city is a member of the Business Council, and we're really here to help. The other one is for your data, I just want to see if the jobs of agriculture were included in your manufacturing. Because it's value added, it might be wrapped in. It's good. It would be nice to separate it. Manufacturing is the driver of economic development, even more than agriculture, but a lot of times because ag is value added with processing, it gets folded in.
I'm sorry if I missed the question there. What's your question?
Are agricultural jobs included in manufacturing for the data that was presented in the ED 0.1?
I believe that was an assessment primarily of more non-food related manufacturing jobs. But certainly many of the actual strategies and policies within the document would relate to food as well as non-food issues. But again, if there are specific steps that you think the city should be taking in order to attract more food-related manufacturing, it's certainly the case that Hollister is at the center of a very vibrant agricultural area. And if you see additional steps that the city should take to focus on agricultural manufacturing, please make those suggestions.
I'd love to, and I will. The other one was the Hollister Downtown Association's downtown strategy plan and parking strategy included as data that was collected in development of the general plan?
Yes.
Okay, great. The other one is the County Workforce Development Board does workforce services and business surveys. It could be an asset. It might be nice for collaboration, but also understanding that county workforce, business services, the workforce board could be an asset. If that could be referred to in ED.1 would be fantastic.
Okay.
And ED.1 included infrastructure, very critical to our region is power. We have limited capacity for our substation with PG&E. We've had folks that have been intermittently working on generators, and it's been 9 months for them to get a connection. Understanding opportunities with Central Coast Community Energy and other alternative energy providers, and further collaborating with PG&E to make sure that that's happening, as well as broadband, sharing of information. A tremendous amount of our community members are telecommuters, and they're lost for data, and they are either absent, they don't have enough broadband capacity, or don't have reliable broadband connections. So broadband as infrastructure for economic development is absolutely critical. And part of it is, if we're going to support our roads, we need people not to be driving. And if they're not going to be driving, they'll be doing work from home or small businesses, and they need to make sure they have the infrastructure to do their business.
And you're saying including the broadband capacity.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are policies and actions about broadband, either in the economic development element, or I believe it's actually in the infrastructure element, community services.
Yes, I think that's true.
Great. And thank you, Carrie. The county is doing a needs assessment right now. So it's important for our community members that are participating to key into that and to participate in understanding the gaps, because our region has millions of dollars of investment of the state and local governments to invest in improving our capacity. Ooh.
Christina, maybe I'll stop you for a minute. You can
Sure.
look at your notes. Devin has raised his hand, and then if you have any final questions, we'll take yours. We
Yeah.
do need
No,
to
I
go
would
on.
defer to Devin. Thank you, brother.
We
Thank
need
you.
to go on to the climate action plan probably within about 8 or 10 minutes. So, but just let's make sure we get everybody a chance to talk. We'll come back to you, Christina, and then we'll go on to Eli's presentation. Devin.
Yes, hello. I'm in the Masters in Urban Planning program at San Jose State, and in the course of recent studies, I would like to echo Christina Chavez's Wyatt's questions about the broadband internet, because I understand that the paucity of high-speed internet connections is one of the major factors that is discouraging business development and startup development in San Benito County. My other question, which I submitted to Carrie earlier, is in regards to the Northwest periphery, which is, why is the new plan engaged in downzoning in the northwest area of town, Buena Vista Road, Wright Road along Highway with 156? These are areas that were previously designated as R1 residential and mixed use that are now being turned into agricultural.
And Devin, can you clarify that these properties are outside the sphere of influence?
These, I am referring to the properties that are, yes, I do believe these are outside of the sphere of influence as it currently, and there's no proposed expansion of the sphere of influence. But
Right. So I think I don't know if my cursor, there's my cursor. So you're looking at this area in here you're talking about, is that right?
Let me see. I can't see your
You can't see my
screen.
map, you don't have screen access?
David, you're not sharing your screen anymore.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, that's the problem. Hang on just a minute. I'm trying to share my screen. Thank you for saying that. Let's try this again.
Okay.
And I'll try and get that image to be a little bigger. So Devin, I think you're talking about the area somewhere in here, is that right?
More or less, yes. Kind of, yeah, that area. I'm looking at the 2005 plan, and there was a substantial amount of mixed use along Wright Road, and of course, the 2005 plan also had a substantial area that was low density residential. So there's a, looking back and forth between the 2005 and the draft plan. I see a lot of downzoning taking place, and I have the questions for what was the reasoning and the basis for that policy decision.
So again, this is city council direction, went through the GPAC, the planning commission, and the city council, and was reflective of community discussions as well. That is an area that has quite a bit of agricultural activity in it now. The city guidance that we got was that they wanted to maintain that agricultural use, and they wanted to focus residential development within the existing urbanized area and the very edges of that urbanized area. So you do have a few parcels along Buena Vista that are not developed yet and are designated for development. And then there was a policy decision made that the remainder area further north should be maintained as agriculture. You called it, I forgot what word you used, but it almost sounded like it would be a new agricultural use, and that's not the case. It's the agricultural designation would be consistent with the use that's currently there. Okay, I'm going to stop the share again. Other than Christina, does anybody have any other questions? Christina, we can give you the floor for 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we'll need to move on to the climate action plan. And we can stay afterwards again to take any other questions.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to help. I'm a nerd on this stuff. And I talk to a lot of people, and it's not that they're disenfranchised. I'm really disappointed at the lack of participation in the meeting. So I'd love to help you in making sure we have more voices here at the table. One is in regard to housing and impact fees, could be their consideration of amending impact fees to have it be per square foot versus per unit. There really is no incentive, and we don't have community assets to incentivize developers to build high density condos, apartments, and in working with business community, that's exactly what we need for our current residents and for our businesses that are looking to grow here. Our manufacturers are growing 35–40% organically a year, and this is what they need, and they're commuting in from Los Banos. We'd love to have that happen. So anywhere that you can have a referral to an opportunity for looking at policies that we can't directly incentivize the development of affordable housing, but to amend policies to do that would be fantastic.
Okay,
So,
Christy, did you want to add something?
Sure, Christina, please add this into your written comments that would go to the city council as we go through this. I think David mentioned we are continued to even we are going to be continuing to take public comment on the general plan all the way through adoption. So make sure you please use the general plan email. And just so you know that the city is planning on looking at our impact fees. I don't have an exact time for you, but keep watch for that as well. So there'll be a lot of notice on looking at how we calculate them and the impact fees themselves.
And thank you, Christy. And just as a point of reference, the Business Council and a lot of folks I do work with, we had supported a restriction on single family market rate residential development, and HCD totally shut it down. So part of its point of reference, just for history, if I can be assistance whatsoever. The other one is the city and the county had a joint committee for affordable and workforce housing. and the mayor and Chispa and other members of the community have been part of that. And a lot of it was looking at where are there pockets of zoning within the SOI and city limits of the city that we could look at density and actually not necessarily incentivizing, but would be a really good place for affordable housing to be located. And finding ways of assets to provide zoning and infrastructure support to make sure that we pave the pathway for developers to have affordable housing to be built. The other
Well, and Christina, just if I could interject and say that that's particularly timely because the housing element is running a little bit behind this. It's being prepared by a different consultant for the city. And if you have particular sites that you and the development community have identified as ones that you really want to see in the housing element, please send those maps on to staff, and the housing element consultant team will consider them.
And David, there are not my maps. It's not stakeholders. It's a city, county, community partnership that was developed under former leadership of the County Health and Human Services, former director James Reddingsward. I don't know if a lot of people even know who he was or what they did. I'm here to help. Okay, the other one is ag mitigation. Are we going to cover that now or later?
Later.
The other one is there's a TOT tax reimbursement or program for the hotels. It wasn't asked for. It was a gimme to the private industry that they didn't really ask for it. It could have, resulted in maybe $1 million more back to the city and TOT that could have really happened. It's past decisions that were well intended, and we're trying to bring in more hospitality. I don't think we really need to do that, frankly. It's just a point of reference and a point of information. And the other one is when you're looking at sector development in ED 1.1, one of the biggest push in our region with the California Economic Recovery Fund, which is through Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, the state of California, there's $6 million in planning incentives that are coming to our region, which is Ventura over to Santa Cruz, including San Benito. The #1 industry they're targeting is manufacturing based in aerospace. And I'd really like a reference to this initiative to make sure that we're at the table, it's in writing, and we have a direction to our minimal community leaders that are participating in the vision committee and the action committee to give them the stabilization to leverage investment in this industry. That's all.
Great.
That's my take.
Well, thank you for all those comments. We have both Harry and Jenny taking notes. We've done our best to note all of those, but I would encourage you to put those in writing with specific references so that the council can consider them as you would have said them directly, as opposed to us trying to reflect them for you. And with that said, I will turn it over to Eli, I'm going to share my screen again so that Eli can do the presentation, and Eli will walk you through the climate action plan.
Thank you, David, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Can you hear me okay? Great, thank you. Well, as David mentioned, we're going to discuss the climate action plan a bit, going into what's included in it, how it works, and how it benefits the city of Hollister. Next slide, please. So the climate action plan is Hollister's strategic plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or what are called GHGs. And in addition to that, it is also intended to help increase community resilience to natural hazards that climate change is likely to make more frequent and more intense. This includes floods, extreme heat, drought, and regional wildfires. It is meant to take some of the higher level goals and policies that are in the general plan, some of the ones that David spoke about earlier, and apply them in a more detailed, focused way. And the climate action plan identifies Hollister's current and future sources and levels of greenhouse gas emissions. It shows what the city can do to reduce those emissions, and it lays out a set of targets and strategies to reduce emissions in a way that will enable the city to meet those targets. Next slide, please. So these are Hollister's sources of greenhouse gas emissions. for the years 2005 and 2019, as well as projections of future greenhouse gas emissions if there is no action taken to reduce those emissions. So this is sort of the worst case scenario that we're showing you here. Overall, between 2005 and 2019, Hollister's greenhouse gas emissions fell about 4%. If no action is taken in future years, those emissions are expected to rise as the population grows and as the city further develops. Every colored section of the bars that you see here in this graph represent a different source of emissions. The dark blue bar that's at the bottom, that is transportation. Those are emissions from cars and trucks on the road. And you can see that is the largest source of emissions in every year. It is half or more of Hollister's greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions from energy use, those are the next bars, the green and the dark red. Those fell quite a bit between 2005 and 2019. And that is in part because of the creation of 3CE and the increases in the amount of electricity from renewable sources. It's also worth pointing out that Hollister's greenhouse gas emissions are represented by that orange line that kind of begins at 2019 and then trends down. You can see that in future years, those targets are far below where Hollister's greenhouse gas emissions are projected to be without any action taken. So there is quite a bit of work to be done to get those emissions down where they ought to be. Next slide, please. To make the most of the climate action plan, Hollister's greenhouse gas reduction target should be consistent with targets that the state has adopted. And the state's current long-term greenhouse gas reduction target was established last year. It's a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 85% below 1990 levels. That translates to about 87% below where Hollister was in 2005. And the idea is to do that reduction by the year 2045. The remaining greenhouse gas emissions should then be offset or canceled out so that the state emits as many emissions into the atmosphere as it absorbs or removes. That means that the state by 2045 aims to be what is called net carbon neutral or net carbon neutrality. And then there is also an intermediate goal of reducing emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And again, the idea with Hollister is that to get the most out of the cap, we are trying to achieve a level of greenhouse gas reduction consistent with what the state is aiming for. Next slide, please. To meet this quite ambitious level of greenhouse gas emission reduction, the Climate Action Plan has 33 greenhouse gas reduction strategies, and these are organized under 8 what you might think of as goals or topic areas. The goals correspond to transportation, solid waste, sustainable energy, other sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And for each strategy, there are a set of actions. There are what are called performance assumptions, which are meant to suggest how many people in the community might need to take the steps that are called for in the strategy to achieve the level of reduction that we've indicated. There are implementation details that are meant to help both city staff and community partners in putting the strategy into effect. And there are indicators that will help the city and the community to track how well the strategy is working, to see if we are on track to achieve those reductions, and then if not, to look at where there might be opportunities for improvement. The strategies that are in the Climate Action Plan include a few mandatory actions. It is mostly voluntary, but there is some mandatory parts to that. And some of those strategies would be led by the city. Some would be led by other members of the community in partnership with the city. So it is something that we're really trying to involve all aspects of the community and trying to look at making sure that it's something that everyone can participate in and contribute to this benefit. Next slide, please. Each strategy also identifies one or more of what we call co-benefits. Co-benefits are benefits that do not directly relate to greenhouse gas emission reduction, but they help support other community goals, improving local air quality, supporting the economy, advancing equity in the community, a number of other items that you can see here. Next slide, please. When you look at the Climate Action Plan and you look at the strategies that are included, this is how they'll be laid out. There is the strategy language itself. There are a set of one or more icons that indicate the co-benefits that the strategy provides. And then following that is the level of greenhouse gas reduction that the strategy can achieve. Those greenhouse gas reductions are given for the years 2030, 2040, and 2045, and they are separated out by the city limits, the sphere of influence, and the total planning area. And then following the greenhouse gas reductions are the set of actions that are meant to actually implement the strategy. Next slide, please. And then this is another strategy, just so you can see how that layout is repeated throughout the CAP. So the CAP doesn't do much good, as with all planning documents. It needs to be put into practice. It needs to be effectively implemented. Otherwise, it just sits on a shelf. So there is a lot in the document that is meant to improve implementation. And this includes identifying who, specifically which city department, is responsible for a strategy, and who else should be part of implementation to play a supportive or you will co-implementer role. And that can include other parts of the city, other public agencies, community organizations, business groups, really anyone who might be involved in the climate action plan. The implementation discussion also includes mention of how strategies should be funded, when they should be carried out, and about how the city can monitor and report on the strategy's effectiveness. There is also language about maintaining and updating the climate action plan in future years. So the idea is that this is something that can change and evolve as the community grows and as new opportunities become available. And this is a comparison of Hollister's greenhouse gas emissions. The red line up there corresponds to those bars that you saw earlier. Those are emissions without any future actions. The dotted line is where Hollister was in the year 2005. And then that purple line that trends downward, that shows where future emissions are expected to be with the climate action plan. You can see that most of sort of the early reductions come from actions that the state is taking, but especially after 2030, it really does become more of a local contribution. As these programs ramp up and become more effective, most of Hollister's reductions are coming from those local efforts to implement the CAP. And we are happy to say that by 2045, the CAP is expected to bring Hollister's emissions down below that 85% threshold, so meeting or exceeding the very ambitious target that the state has laid out. So that is an overview of the climate action plan. We are happy to take questions. As David mentioned earlier, please send any questions through the chat to Carrie or raise your hand to speak. And if we don't have time to get to your question now, we should hopefully have some time at the end of the workshop. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation, Eli. I see Devin's hand up, so we'll take that first, and then Carrie, I'll come to you and ask if you've had questions submitted in writing. Devin?
Yeah. Well, of course, your charts showed that, most of the emissions are from vehicular emissions. In particular, I wanted to know if that includes agricultural vehicles in the transportation category, or whether that's separate in the agricultural category. But could you also elaborate on what implementation plans and action plans existed as regards to introducing mass transit modality, and also to basically supporting the introduction of more electrical charging stations, especially agricultural, vehicle electric charging stations?
Yes, absolutely. Whether the emissions from transportation include agricultural vehicles, my understanding is yes, that they do. We also have emissions from agricultural equipment, like tractors and balers and so on, that are also included. Those are designated as off-road equipment emissions. So we're trying to capture, again, that full spectrum of emissions as much as we can. There are strategies in the Climate Action Plan for increasing public transit. That includes improvements to local public transit, as well as greater connections to the regional networks. And there are absolutely more electric vehicle charging stations that are called for in the Climate Action Plan, both at the residential and at the non-residential level. The CAP does provide some specifics on how that should be implemented. It's not trying to be overly prescriptive. We certainly want city staff and community partners to be able to implement these strategies at the appropriate time as it best makes sense at the time, given available community resources, given community needs. So we're not at the point where we're saying there should be this many strategies at this shopping center and this many strategies at this processing facility. But there are some details in the climate action plan about that.
Great, thank you for that, Eli. Carrie, are there other folks who asked any questions?
I do not have any questions.
All right. We do still have the agricultural preservation ordinance to talk about, but before we get to that, let me just ask if there are other folks who want to ask any other questions of Eli about the climate action plan. Okay, there's Christina. Christina, do you have a question or two?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. One is just as a point of information for Eli, we do have a county green business committee. It's run out of the chamber. We have a county green business program. A lot of it's based in greenhouse gas emissions. We've had some resistance of having electrical vehicle charging stations in our downtown because we can get grants to get them installed, but we don't have the acumen or the staff to maintain them. So it's been an opportunity we haven't been able to take advantage of because we don't have the staff or the team to do it. The other one is we do have could be a very major greenhouse gas emission impact. Our county landfill is reaching capacity. We're looking at alternatives. One of them is a waste transfer station and transporting our waste outside of our county, in which case it would be collected locally, packed and sent. The impact of greenhouse gas emissions could be pretty massive, given the fact our landfill's been around since 1968. It's just another point of information.
Thank you for that
Thank you for
information.
that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. We have a very strong community base with the chamber and a county integrated waste management department that could really support the IWM and the greenhouse gas emissions element. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on the climate action plan? All right, hearing none, let me try once again to see if I can figure out how to share my screen successfully. We are here and ready to go on to the agricultural preservation program. Everybody can see that slide again? All right, good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the agricultural preservation program in the form of the ordinance that's being reviewed now as well. This is a program that's intended to partially offset the loss of agricultural lands as urbanization occurs and to protect that farmland that is put in the preservation program from urban development. And the mechanism to do that is to preserve land through agricultural conservation easements, which, as many of you know, are legally binding agreements under which the land is to remain in agricultural use rather than being urbanized at a later date. The program has within it a requirement that for every 1 acre of land that is to be urbanized, 2 acres of lands are to be dedicated under an agricultural easement. So this means it's 2 acres of lands preserved for every 1 acre developed. The program requires that all lands to be preserved must be within the Hollister planning area. That's the area that I showed you earlier in the presentation, and you can see it here on the map. That's in the darker colors. Those are all the areas within the Hollister planning areas. And eligible lands for preservation include anything that's designated by the state as prime farmland of statewide importance, unique farmland, or farmland of local importance. It's any lands that qualify as class 1 or 2 soils, any range lands supporting at least 1 animal per acre, and orchards and vegetable farms that may not meet any of those other criteria, but which still produce a minimum annual return of at least $200 per acre. So it's a pretty wide-ranging definition and one that would pick up many of the lands around the edges of the city of Hollister. It does also, the ordinance also requires that lands must be in active agricultural use, or they can also be lands that are able to be put into use within 1 year. and it's lands that have to be served by a water supply that's adequate to support the agricultural use in question. So this program overall is intended to be able to preserve agricultural lands around the city, again, by requiring that for every 1 acre of developed land, that at least 2 acres of agricultural land meeting those definitions are preserved under an agricultural easement. And that's a very brief presentation just to explain the program to you. It is a very detailed ordinance that's available for your review. And this is the final of our 3 presentations. I'll stop the share there, and we can take any questions or comments you have about that. And then we'll wrap up by just taking a time for others who might want to add additional comments or information before we close. And I do have some, before we do that, I also just have a few slides to wrap up to talk about the schedule and things. But before we do that, let me ask now, are there questions or comments about the agricultural preservation program?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, none have come in writing. And Christina said she had some, but now I don't see her on the screen anymore. I don't know if she, oh, there she is. Hi, Christina, there you are. Did you, I think you said to me earlier that you had a question about the program.
Sorry, I was watching the Nuggets hopefully beat the Lakers tonight. Multitasking. So I would love to connect your folks with the Monterey County or the San Benito County Farm Bureau. We have a new executive director. They've gone through a leadership change to just dig into it. They're farmers, they're ranchers, they're the folks that are really involved in it. And I see my friend Tony is here. Is how would you define adequate water supply? We have an issue in our community for water quality, and we have to import water to mix with a lot of our groundwater because it's naturally polluted with naturally occurring minerals and salts, etc. So it's a sensitive issue. The ag mitigation before had been 1-to-1. I think 1-to-1 could be most adequate, and 1 to 1.5 for prime. And how that's defined, I'd like to defer to my colleagues in agriculture, Mr. Alameda with Sabor Farms, and the community and our Farm Bureau. So just let me know, please, who on your team that I can connect to have that conversation. As much as it would be good for me to provide written comment, I'm a connector and a networker, and I have a full-time job and I consult. Putting pen to paper is difficult, and I don't speak on behalf of a lot of others, as I prefer to put your team in a discussion with subject matter experts. Mr. Gibson is also a farmer, etc. Is just, they understand it. They understand the nuts and bolts. And the biggest thing is, ideally, this is a 20-year plan. Our city has invested a lot of money, interest, time, and emotion in making sure that we have a plan that's solid and people actually agree with. We've had general plans in our community that people say very recently after it's been approved that they don't agree with it. They put it on the shelf. We want this to be a living, breathing document. It's something that we can work with Christy and Dave and our team at the city. We've been through a lot. Opportunities are passing us by. We're 20 miles south of the fastest growing economy in the community. And we are burdened with housing them, providing services for them. We're split between 2 Caltrans districts. It's just a lot. It's very complicated. We just want to be here to help, and we want to make sure that we're empowering and working with your team of having a document and a work plan. We can work with Christy and David and all of our team to make it work.
Well, we really appreciate that. And, as I think we've been working on this project already for 3 years. We've had very extensive involvement and very extensive engagement. I don't recall, Christina, if you've been at previous meetings, but certainly you would have been welcome to have been, and we have taken all the comments that we've received at those meetings, and we'll look at all your comments coming in as they move forward. I want to make sure, you mentioned Mr. Gibson and Mr. Alameda. I want to make sure everyone understands that all the content that you see in all 3 of these documents is reflective of guidance that we did receive from the General Plan Advisory Committee, from the Planning Commission, and from the City Council. That's not to say that it can't be changed, but it's not by any means that we've manufactured these policies or programs on our own at the staff or consultant level. We've worked closely over these 3 years to get guidance on them from GPAC, Planning Commission, and City Council. And our job right now has been to make sure that we translate that guidance. It's taken us about a year to do that work. It's a very extensive document, but we've worked to take all that guidance that we received and translate it into the plan itself. So just like I said this about the general plan, the agricultural preservation ordinance also is one that the City Council already opined on. I heard you say that you felt that it's not actually accurate that there's an existing program in place requiring one-to-one mitigation, but there has been that mitigation required through many city EIRs. It is true that that has occurred, but this council directed that a program should be put in place, and they directed that it should be at a 2-to-1 mitigation level instead of 1-to-1 or 1.5-to-1. That said, they're still draft documents, and so if others have comments about this and are asking that the council change guidance and direction on that, I'm sure the council will consider that. So please do submit those comments, and we will get council guidance further about it and make changes if requested.
Thank you, David. And I will tell you, prior efforts, as much as people in our community are concerned and they want to participate, the prior sessions were not facilitating a transparent, welcoming, open, conducive discussion because of prior politics and other emotions that have been taking place in the past. So I'm really hoping that we'll be a temperament and a patience moving forward. And Christy, thank you in being new to this process. And Carol can tell you, we have a big opportunity. This is a very important document about the future of our community, and being open to having different voices from different perspectives is going to be tremendously important. And not having our community members participating in public meetings out of fear of being ridiculed on social media, being personally disparaged, and being treated unkindly. We just we haven't had the type of forum. It's not welcoming to getting a lot of perspectives. I thank you, and thanks.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're here now. I'm sorry you had that sense before. I was the person facilitating in the past, and I've certainly tried both tonight and at other times to be as inclusive as possible, but I understand if you felt like it was actually scary to come to a meeting in the past. I'm very sorry that happened, and I'm glad you're here now.
No, David, I'm not the one to be afraid, and my colleagues and my friends here will tell you that. There are a lot of other community members that, you know, might feel the same. That's all.
I see. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about the agricultural preservation program?
I got one comment that said, I think the 2-to-1 ratio is excellent. I hope I can get the county to follow suit.
Great. Thank you for that. Anything else?
I
see Skip's hand up. And Skip, you know, I apologize. I think I saw you raise your hand once before, and then you didn't keep waving at me, so I didn't call on you earlier, but I'm glad you raised it again. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I believe I'm hooked up, but in any case, I just wanted to comment on a couple of aspects that interact on several things that have been discussed, and there are more comments, to be honest, than questions. In the general plan and throughout discussion, I see not too much discussion and consideration for the impact on agricultural operations of development. And commenting on the questions that came from Carson rather early on about ag properties or properties being either left in agriculture or zoning or moved to that zoning category, surrounded more or less by current or prospective development, they are heavily circumscribed in what they can do for agricultural operations. So the impact is quite significant. Devin's my son, just to clarify a few things there. Anyhow, we're on Buena Vista Road, outside of the sphere of influence, closer to the sphere of influence than out to 156. And the land near us under operations is impacted significantly by food safety considerations imposed by the state, not particularly unreasonable ones. But you know, you have a dog coming out of your nearby development, and if evidence of that dog doing anything other than taking a nice sniff of the air, you have a problem. And any number of measures are taken to deal with that. So I would like to urge and perhaps encourage perhaps some more discussion and comment on that in the proposed general plan. And also earlier discussed my son called it downzoning, but you call it what you like, lands in our general area that were previously low density residential. When that, if it comes to pass, it becomes agricultural, I don't expect that to have a huge effect on the likelihood or time span over which development might occur out here. However, it does impact the economic operations of the agricultural elements operating in the area insofar as things like the collateral value of the land and the potential borrowing potential for operating capital and things like that. So there is an interaction, and just encouraging some awareness in that area. And I think that's it.
Great. Thank you for those comments. Really appreciate them. Anything else at this point? I will put up a couple more slides and people can think while I'm showing them, just to wrap up, about any final comments that you may have. I'm going to need a minute here again to get to the right spot. You should stop. That's the wrong thing. Hang on again. Sorry about that. Try this again. Here we are. That should be a slide showing next steps. And I just wanted to make sure, again, I already mentioned this, but to make sure that you're all aware that the draft EIR was published yesterday. The EIR requires a 45-day review period, and there will be a public hearing specifically about the EIR on June 22nd. At that same meeting on June 22nd, which is a meeting of the Planning Commission, the Planning Commission will hold a review of the general plan itself as well as the agricultural program and the CAP. So if you have specific comments that you want to bring forward, that meeting on June 22nd would be a time to do that, and you're welcome to submit comments in writing as well. The City Council will also be holding a review of all the documents in August. That date is not scheduled yet. Many of you are probably aware the council does not meet in July, and we wanted to do the council meeting obviously after the Planning Commission meeting, and so the council meeting will be at a time in August. And then after all those meetings have occurred, if the council does direct it, we will make any necessary changes to any of the documents and then bring them back for formal adoption hearings, which, depending on the extent of those comments ultimately from the City Council, we're hoping to come back for actual adoption hearings in September and October. If the council directs extensive comments and changes, we might have a delay there, depending on the timing and depending on the quantity of changes that the council asks to see. But that's our overall schedule that's coming before us. Again, the project documents are available for review on our website at hollister2040.org. You can send comments in writing to generalplan@hollister.ca.gov. The comment period is open at least through that council meeting that will occur in August. So you can feel free to submit comments here in May, in June, in July, and even into early August. I would encourage you to get them in. Keep track of when that council meeting is announced. And if possible, I would say get those comments in at least a week before the council meeting so that the council members have a chance to consider your comments as they give us guidance on any changes needed to these documents before the adoption hearings. And that concludes the presentation. I want to thank you all again very much. And I'm just going to ask again if there are additional questions or comments that people want to share before we break. And it's exactly 8 o'clock. It's 7:59. So I want to thank you all for your time. I didn't see anybody else making a comment. Eva, are you waving goodbye or did you have a comment you wanted to?
I just saw briefly, Victoria, your hand, and I didn't know if that was a wave.
Oh, I thought Victoria was applauding. What a wonderful
It was the applaud. Thank
Oh,
you
okay.
for recognizing that.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't see which hand it was, so I wanted to make
Right.
sure he did have.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva, for pointing that out. Anything else before we wrap up? All right. Then thank you all very much for your time. We look forward to any written comments you want to submit. We would be happy to see you at the meetings in June and again at the council meeting in August. Thanks a lot. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.